Hello everyone, my name is Emma and welcome back to my channel. I hope that you guys are all enjoying the warm spring weather and that it's bringing you as much joy and happiness as it is bringing to me. I thought that a really fun way to start spring off would be to do a winter reading wrap up and share with you guys about the books that I have read from January to March. So if you are interested in hearing about the books that I've read so far this year, then just keep on watching. So I started off the year in a bit of a fantasy mood, which is a little bit outside of my comfort zone, and my first pick for that was Caraval by Stephanie Garber. This book follows a pair of sisters as they enter into kind of a whimsical game that helps them to escape from troubles that are kind of happening at home, and it follows the sisters as they get separated from each other and one is trying to rescue the other. The one that is on the rescue mission is kind of following this stranger who she isn't really sure she can trust, and there's a lot of that kind of going on in the book about not knowing who you can trust and trying to remember that whatever is happening in Caraval is only a game, because a lot of it feels very real and very tricky. So that is kind of a summary of the book. I ended up giving this book a 4-star. I really enjoyed it. I thought that the writing was very beautiful and that Stephanie Garber painted a really interesting and unique kind of setting for the story that really fit well with the plot and everything that was going on. I really loved a lot of the minor characters, felt like they stood out to me, which is always a great thing, and they kind of propelled the story along as well. For me personally, the main characters were where I kind of was like, okay about it. I felt like they are not completely stock characters, but they're definitely characters that I've seen before with a little more nuance or a little twist to make it fit the book a little bit better, and so I would have loved to see them be just a little bit more original, I guess. But I thought that it was fun, and I would be interested to continue this series to see if the characters kind of develop further over the course of the 2 other books and the novella, because I think that's definitely a possibility. When you're starting a big long series, you might not get as good of a sense of the characters at the very beginning, but I definitely want to continue with the series. I just haven't gotten around to it yet because there have been other things that I've been more excited to read or have gravitated towards, but I definitely enjoyed my time with this book and look forward to returning to the next books in the series. So the next book that I picked up is the start of a series called The Remnant Chronicles by Mary E. Pearson, and it is The Kiss of Deception. This series blew me away. Like I said, I am really not that much of a fantasy reader. I've never really enjoyed fantasy all that much. It's just not something I've gravitated towards, but I picked up Dance of Thieves and Vow of Thieves just because I've seen a lot about them and heard that they're pretty popular, and I didn't realize that The Remnant Chronicles were books that came before and were kind of set in the same world. So I spent a little bit of time googling whether or not you need to read The Remnant Chronicles before you read Dance of Thieves and Vow of Thieves, and there was really not a general consensus online, so I just decided that since it was more books, I would go ahead and ask for those for Christmas actually, and pick them up and read them before, just so that I have kind of a fuller picture of the world. So I started with The Kiss of Deception in January, and I absolutely loved it. I gave it a 5-star. The characters in this book are super unique. They are very lovable because they are flawed and they have things that they need to work on, and because you just, in the first book, don't know a lot about them, you're getting to know them. Immediately they kind of grip you with the different bold personality traits. I really love following this story. The setting of this book was also absolutely beautiful and really well done. I like that it felt like there were different distinct settings, from where Leah ends up living in Terravan after she runs away. This is kind of the first part of the book, so it's not really a spoiler, but the part where she's living in was very beautiful, and then also the Citadel, the kind of descriptions of the Citadel itself were very beautiful. I also love that the characters felt like they came from different places because they're from different kingdoms. It didn't feel like they were just kind of variations. You could definitely see the differences among them, and once again, the minor characters in this book really stand out. I still remember Birdie and some of the other characters as well, and just remember really enjoying getting to read about their characters. The Kiss of Deception follows Leah as she first escapes from her arranged marriage and kind of tries to find a new life and build a new life for herself, until she realizes that there is some trouble starting because of her running away and kind of larger plans unfolding that are threatening her kingdom and her people. It was definitely a bit of a cliffhanger at the end of the book, but I felt like it was a well-earned cliffhanger and that we got enough of a story in the first book to feel like it was worth being a complete book. And I just really love being introduced to this world. So right after The Kiss of the Deception, I jumped into the next book, The Heart of Betrayal. This one follows Leah as she is trapped in the kingdom of Venda, and that is on the back of the book again, so it's not a spoiler. It follows her while she's there and kind of getting used to the kingdom of Venda's customs and cultures, but also kind of hoping for some different resolutions and things to happen for rescue and that kind of thing. And so this book honestly is a little bit muddy in my mind. I remember that I loved it just as much as the others, but but I kind of see the Remnant Chronicles all as one thing, even though they're split up into the 3 books. So it's kind of hard to distinguish between each book, and I think that shows that it's a really good story, that it's all like bound together that well in my mind. This one was definitely very interesting as well. It was cool to see how Leah kind of adjusted to the different culture that she was in and that kind of thing. I don't want to give away like any spoilers either, but I will just say that I really loved the writing. I really loved, again, being introduced to new minor characters in this book and getting to know them. I felt like they stood out as well, and we got to see more character development from Leah and from the other 2 main characters as well. So that was The Heart of Betrayal, and then again, right after I finished this, it ends on a cliffhanger, and I immediately wanted to jump into the next book. So the 3rd book in the series is The Beauty of Darkness, and this one was absolutely beautiful. I would say that this is probably my favorite book from the series, just because we get all of the loose ends tied up and so many more plot lines. I will say that for the whole series, Mary E. Pearson keeps you guessing on what's going to happen, who's going to end up with who. It follows a love triangle between Leah, Rafe, and Caden. I don't want to share who each of these people are other than Leah being the princess, because I don't want to give any spoilers that might happen in the first book. I really like to go into books knowing as little as possible, so I'm trying to share more just like the quality and stuff of the books that I liked rather than giving too much of the plot away. But the writing continued to just be so beautiful in this. We got to see lots of beautiful descriptions of where the characters were going and visiting kind of through some traveling and that kind of thing, and getting to just learn so much about the history of what's happened that led all up to what culminates in the ending of the 3rd book. And it was beautiful. Mary E. Pearson also does a really good job at just keeping you guessing and making you not sure what's going to happen next, and I really love that as well. So I was blown away by the series. I absolutely love it. I still think about it. There were so many just kind of things that I could connect this book to as well, and I love stories that talk about light and darkness and kind of the difficult choices that people have to make sometimes, and the series definitely touched on that. I really love the series. I gave it a 5-star all the way through, and I would definitely recommend it to anyone who likes fantasy, and even people that don't like fantasy that much. This series definitely has some fantasy elements to it, but it is not super heavy. It almost reads more like historical fiction in a lot of ways, just because the fantasy part of it is really not that heavy, at least in these books. I don't know if that's true for Dance of Thieves and Vow of Thieves, because I haven't gotten around to reading those 2 yet, but at least in these, it feels much more like historical fiction than fantasy, but definitely the fantasy elements are there. That is also good for people that do like fantasy, so I think that was why it was an easier fantasy read for me too. It's just because it wasn't so heavy on the fantasy, and the world building wasn't revolving around like a magic system or anything like that. So I really love this series. 5 stars all the way through, as I said. But yeah. Alright, so my next book was my January book of the month pick, and that was Most Eligible by Isabel Engel. This book follows a character who is going undercover on basically like a bachelorette or bachelor show, trying to see like how the cast of the show is actually treated, what the producers are really like, the kind of things they get up to. She's kind of trying to write an expose of reality TV, specifically the Bachelor show. And so that is what the main character is doing, but when she is there, she finds someone that she had previously had a relationship with or connected with who kind of broke her heart, and so it's kind of following her as she's trying to figure out how she's feeling about that and those kind of things. So I ended up giving this book a 3 or a 3.5. I might have given it a 4 on Goodreads, but I think I would say a 3.5 at most. For me personally, there was just some things I didn't like in it. I don't like spice as a reader, and so I skipped those parts, and there was just some other inappropriate stuff that was in there that I felt like didn't need to be in there, because it's not in, like, I've watched a few seasons of The Bachelor, some because of this book, because I just wanted to, out of curiosity, kind of see what that was like, but that kind of thing wasn't really in there, and so it felt like an embellishment in this that wasn't really necessary. And then also, to me personally, there just wasn't a lot of chemistry between her and the main love interest. I felt like, yes, they got along and everything, but it was just kind of like instant attraction, or like, it didn't feel like a very deep connection to them. And I think the reason that it didn't feel like a deep connection between those characters is because the characters themselves honestly felt flat. To me, I felt like the main bachelor of the show had a little bit more of a personality than the main character of the book and the main love interest who is the host of the show, just because we get to see him more in action, I guess. And like, the show is obviously trying to share a lot about him because he is the main bachelor, but to me, he felt more three-dimensional as a person than the two main characters of the book. We just didn't get a lot of background info on their families, on their dynamics, on their interests, on really anything. It was kind of just very plot driven to see if they would end up together at the end or not, and also to kind of expose the bachelor or show for all of its faults and weaknesses and that kind of thing. So I feel like if that was what Isabel Engel was going for, like for the more funny haha plot and trying to like expose like what it can be like to be on one of those shows, then it definitely hit those kind of on the head. But personally, the characters themselves fell flat, and so the rom-com part of it, or the romance part of the rom-com, really wasn't there for me. But I did enjoy my time reading it, so I definitely would recommend it if you are interested in kind of that kind of satire writing, but for the romance, maybe not. But yeah, that is Most Eligible by Isabel Engel. So that concludes my January books, and now we will hop into February. So my first book of February, I read in anticipation of the movie coming out for Wuthering Heights, which I'm not really going to get into the movie while I'm talking about this, but I did read Wuthering Heights, the book, in preparation for that, and I enjoyed my time reading it. It was definitely not what I was expecting. I feel like, personally, I've heard of Wuthering Heights being like a romance novel, and it was definitely not a romance. It was a gothic novel with some different themes that are kind of orchestrated towards romance, but that's not necessarily the main point of the book. And I actually really have enjoyed kind of having a little bit of discourse about the movie with like my friend. I went to see the movie with my friend, but also just watching and listening to different opinions, because it has made me realize how much there truly is to Wuthering Heights. It definitely is a book that focuses on really hard themes for modern readers to kind of think about, because it's a little bit disconnected from our reality in some ways, but in other ways it's really not. There's a lot of discussion about class and racism and that kind of thing, and I felt like that was really well done in this book. Just seeing the way that Heathcliff is treated, seeing the way that the Earnshaw family treats him, how the Earnshaw family kind of functions, and then also seeing how the Linton family functions. All of those were really interesting dynamics. I really love the way that this book kind of explains or explores how generational trauma works as well, and what kind of effects are passed down to children from their parents. I thought it did a good job discussing that, and I think it also does a really good job discussing kind of like toxic love in a way, because the relationship between Catherine and Heathcliff is so polarizing and causes so much trouble for both of them. I think it explains what kind of barriers there can be to love in a very interesting way, and I found that this book was really nuanced. I really enjoyed reading this and thinking about it afterwards. I didn't give it a 5-star just because personally it wasn't something I was as interested in, and I felt like the first half of the book really dragged for me. It was definitely hard to get through like the first 100 pages or so, but once I was reading the second half of the book, especially about the children, I was much more invested in and wanted to see kind of like what happened with them. It was definitely a very interesting read. I think I gave it 4 stars just because of that initial drag, and then also just like personal things I didn't like. It wasn't as interesting to me, but it would definitely be interesting to someone that is maybe more interested in psychology. I think that Heathcliff is a really interesting psychology study. I also think the children in the book are a really interesting psychology study topics, or potential really interesting psychology study topics. So that was Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. My next book for February was my February Book of the Month pick, which was All Quiet on the Western Front by Eric Maria Remarque. This book follows a young man who ends up becoming a soldier during World War I, and kind of his experiences being pulled out of school at a very young age. I think he was 16 or 17 in the book, maybe a little older, but he leaves school directly to become a part of the war efforts and to be kind of a frontline soldier as well. He is a trench soldier. He's fighting in the trenches. He's seeing everything that's going on the front lines, and his friends also go with him. And it was really interesting to read about the effect his experiences in the war had on him and his outlook on life. One thing that was very interesting was how he was explaining that older men, when they finished the war, would be able to go back to the lives that they had before the war. They had jobs, they had families, but for him, because of the age that he was, he wasn't going to really have that experience necessarily. He didn't really have anything to go back to, because he was kind of at a turning point of his life between when school was ending and when a job would have begun, but the war began for him, and just how formative that experience was for him. It is definitely a super sad book and definitely very gruesome, so if you have kind of sensitivities to gruesome writing and stuff, then I would tread carefully with this book. But I do think that it's a really important read, because I think it's important to be made aware of the realities of war, because I think it can be easy to see the glory in going to war and all of those things, and I think those are important, but I think it's also important to see the other side and to see what it's really like for soldiers on the front lines. Remarque himself was a frontline soldier, and so he had a lot of authority to be able to write about these topics with a very genuine perspective. I also just found the writing in this book to be so beautiful. There are so many places that I highlighted because the writing itself was just so descriptive, so just poetic in a lot of ways. I love it when prose is poetic. I've talked about it a few times on my channel, but this book does a really good job at that, and it honestly makes the book that much more heartbreaking since it is told from the perspective of that soldier. We see how beautiful his soul and his mind and that kind of thing are, and to see that all of that is kind of put not to waste, but like is troubled by the the war. I think that makes the book just that much more heartbreaking. So that was All Quiet on the Western Front. All right, so my last book for February was Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. So Project Hail Mary follows a middle school science teacher who is sent on Project Hail Mary to try and save the human race by figuring out how to stop the black line that is appearing across the sun from dimming the earth. He basically needs to find a solution to that, how to get the line to go away so that earth can not die, basically. That is the story that we're following. So I really love this book. I am a big sci-fi fan, and so I knew that I would like this from the very beginning just because it is sci-fi, but also sometimes sci-fi can be hard because it can be very technical, and this definitely had a lot more technical aspects to the sci-fi. There's a lot of explanation going on of the different experiments that the main character was doing and that kind of thing, and so that could be a little bit more tedious to work through, but I felt like because it was told from the perspective of a middle school science teacher, it almost lent itself to that because he's able to explain it in a way that a lot more people would be able to understand than just people who are generally interested in science, and so I like that. I also really love the sense of humor that was in this book. I think Andy Weir is a really funny writer. It was really interesting to read the different dialogue that was going on, and the way that the main character thinks to himself is also really entertaining. He's a very sarcastic kind of character, and I really liked that humor element to it as well. I also just found the story to be very beautiful in terms of what it was asking of a person, like what they would consider, what they would give up to be willing to save Earth, because there's a lot of challenges that the main character has to face in regards to that, and so Andy Weir did a good job kind of handling those topics as well. And it also wrapped up very nicely. I felt like everything kind of got tied up in the end, and it was really cool just to see and hear about all of the different characters that went into making this Project Hail Mary mission happen, even though most of the characters are not on the scene for most of the book. It's primarily the main character and kind of what he's going through up in space. And so it was interesting to see how even minor characters that were off the page could really play a big role in the story. So I really loved Project Hail Mary. I gave it a 5-star. I would definitely recommend it if you like sci-fi, if you like humor and that kind of thing. I will say that the science language stuff, that can be a little bit technical at times, so you might have to like push through some of that if you're not as interested. I definitely found myself having to like push through when I wasn't as interested in some of the sciencey stuff, but I think that because there's so much balance between that and everything else that's going on, it kind of evens out in the end and becomes a book that's all around enjoyable for everyone. So I would definitely recommend Project Hail Mary to you if you have been interested in picking it up, or if you watch the movie and you want to get the full story behind Project Hail Mary as well. Alright, so now we are going to hop into my most recent reads, which are the books that I read during March. My first March read was a very highly anticipated read for me, and that was Just Friends by Haley Pham. This book follows Blair and Declan. Blair is just recently graduated college, and Declan is her childhood best friend, and it is following them as they re-meet around, I think, like 5 years after a tragedy kind of splits them apart for a little while tragedy is wreaking havoc in Blair's own life and causing her to reconsider what her dreams are, what she wants out of life and everything. So that is the premise of the novel, and it is a romance novel. I would also call it a contemporary fiction novel because it is definitely focused on Blair and how she processes grief and all of those kind of things, but it flips back and forth between the present day timeline and different scenes from Blair and Declan's earlier relationship, which I personally really liked as a way to tell the story. It was definitely interesting to kind of see how different things triggered different memories for Blair, and so I really liked that part of the book. I also really liked the main characters. I felt like they were very well developed. I thought that Blair was very thoughtful, and it was clear that she had a lot going on and that she was a really bright thinker, and I felt like she was just very complex. There was so much going on with her in terms of what she was facing, but also what she thought life was supposed to be about and those kind of things, and so it was interesting to see how she grappled with all of that, and it was also interesting to see where Declan went with the kind of tragedy that happened with him and what he chose to do with his life. I also really love the setting of this book. It's set in Seabrook, California, which I think is a fictional town. I'm not 100% sure, but the setting was beautiful. The different descriptions of the beaches and the coffee shop and that kind of thing are all beautiful, and so I really loved reading about that, and I felt like the setting fit the story very well. The plot of this book was very exciting. I was able to read it really quickly, almost overnight to be honest, because it just keeps you gripped. There is always something happening for these characters, whether it's in the past and you want to jump back to the past point of view so that you can get back to what was happening, or whether something is happening in the present. All of it is really exciting, and so it was a quick read. I also found the writing to be very beautiful. There were some parts where I was like, the language is a little bit awkward, or this could be tightened up, or this doesn't seem like necessarily realistic, but I did really like the writing overall, and there were some very beautiful lines and just very beautiful observations about life, especially by Blair as she's being influenced by her grief, and so that was really cool to read as well. I gave this book a 4-star on Goodreads. I really liked it. I found the writing to be good, I found the characters to be good, the plot to be good, and everything. It was just kind of missing something that made it 5 stars for me. It was just like, this is a really good solid first book, you know, and so I would definitely be interested to see what Haley Pham writes in the future, but this was definitely a great start, and I really liked Just Friends. The second book that I read in March, you guys kind of got to see me talk about in my reading vlog video, but that is This Story Might Save Your Life by Tiffany Crum. This was my March book of the month pick. This story follows 2 podcasters, one of whom goes missing with her husband while the other is left behind to figure out where she is. It is definitely a really interesting story. I am not personally a mystery thriller kind of person. That's just not ever been something I enjoy, because usually it tends to be kind of icky or dark or gross. Those kinds of things are things I stay away from a little bit, and I just get really easily scared and stressed out, so I don't want that experience when I'm reading. But I decided to pick this one up because I thought it would be fun. It didn't sound as dark and twisted, and it definitely wasn't as dark and twisted in some ways. It wasn't as necessarily psychological, like this is so evil or like demented or anything. It was definitely more of a psychology study, almost like Wuthering Heights. Definitely not like Wuthering Heights in a lot of ways, but like how a lot of the things that happen to the characters cause them to be the way that they are. They weren't just psychopaths of their own right, basically, if that makes sense. And I really like that about this book because it didn't feel like creepy for that reason. I like the plot in this book. It definitely moved very fast. I really like the structure of this novel as well. In the beginning of the book, it is flipping between Benny as he's kind of going through what's happening in the present moment, and then it flips to excerpts from Joy's unfinished autobiography, and so we kind of get the back history of her and Benny's relationship, her and her husband's relationship, and all of that. So that was really interesting and well done as well, because it made you want to keep getting to those other parts. Like if something interesting was happening in the past, you want to get back to the last past, or to the next point of view that is in the past, kind of similar to Just Friends in that way. And so I really like that element of the book because it definitely pulled you along. And this again was another really fast read. I read it pretty much in one sitting. I really enjoyed it. I give this book a 4-star, and the reason that it was a 4-star rather than a 5 is probably mainly because of the characters. Some of them felt a little bit stock character-like to me, but also I just felt like we didn't get to know any of the characters as well as I really would have liked to. We don't get a lot of their family history except for some of them, and those that we do get some family history of, we don't get a lot, and all of the family history that we do get has to go into like how it's informing the plot now, which I think is important, and that's a good choice. But I think because of that, we just didn't get to know that characters like personalities that well, which is kind of interesting when you're focusing on 2 podcasters. I feel like you would get a better sense of their personality just from what I would think. But yeah, so I just felt like we just didn't get to know the characters that well, and I would have liked to get to know them a little bit more. But also, I don't read that many mystery thrillers. Like I said, this is probably like maybe the first mystery thriller that I've ever read, and so I don't know if generally characters are not as important in those books because you're just kind of following the plot and trying to see what happened, who done it, all of that kind of thing. And if so, then that is definitely what this book did, so it doesn't matter as much that the characters weren't as well developed in my opinion. So yeah, that is The Story Might Save Your Life by Tiffany Crum. The next book that I read in March was Theo of Golden by Alan Levi, and I loved this book. I gave it a 5-star off the bat. This book follows an old man named Theo who moves to a small town in Georgia called Golden, and while he is there, he ends up stumbling into this coffee shop where he finds these 92 portraits of people on the walls and decides that he wants to buy all of the portraits and give them back to the people that the portraits are of. And it's kind of following his journey as he does that and meets the townspeople in Golden and kind of establishes himself there. He lives there for about a year through the course of the novel, and so we get to see different seasons and learn different parts of his history as well. And so it's really a story about kindness and friendship and making an impact in the world. I really love this book. I thought that all of the characters really stood out. Theo especially is such a good character. We don't get to know a lot about him right off the bat, and we really don't know much about him until the very end of the book. And so it's very interesting to see how he interacts with people, the reactions he has to certain things, what's important to him, and to kind of think about why is he doing what he's doing was also really interesting. So I really like that aspect of the book. And I also found that the side characters in this book just stood out once again. I have read about lots of great side characters this year so far, and I am really loving it. But the characters, or the side characters in Theo of Golden, are just also beautiful, and their stories are so important. And I think that's a really good thing on the author's part, because they're meant to be important, because Theo is saying their stories are important by buying the portraits and wanting to go meet them and hear their stories. So I really like that part of the book as well. I found the prose to this book to be very poetic and beautiful. The writing was just very well done and very thoughtful writing as well. And there was a lot of good perspective on humanity and people and goodness and kindness and all of those things. And I think that the author handled them in a really good way through Theo as well. And the voice was very appropriate for Theo because he is an older man and he's thinking about these kind of things as he's getting towards the end of his life, especially. So that was very well done. I just think that the author did a really good job at making us love this character and then showing us why kindness and goodness is so important and how important relationships and true connection are as well. So I gave Theo of Golden 5 stars. As I said right from the beginning, it is just a great book and I would definitely recommend it. And then my next book was another 5-star, and that was The Bright Years by Sarah DeMoff. I love this book. This book is so amazing. Sarah DeMoff just did a really good job handling the themes and the topics that she did in this book. There is so much perspective. You can tell that she put so much thought into it as well, just in how the different characters were relating to one of the main characters and his struggles in the book, that kind of thing. So The Bright Years follows the Bright family through 3 different generations. We get to see the grandparents, the parents, and the children through different point of views, and it is just a very beautiful story that kind of explores how different traumas and different choices that people make can impact for generations, and also what the responses to your different family members can be. And Sarah DeMoff handled that really, really well. I was really moved by just the different characters' responses to one of the characters and his struggles in particular in this book. It was just very moving and very eye-opening. Sarah DeMoff just handled this in such a beautiful way and an appropriate way. I think that people don't always consider that there are different perspectives for kind of the struggles that are faced in this book. There can be kind of like a one side of the story to a lot of things, and she did a good job at exploring multiple sides of the story and helping us to see and sympathize with the character that should by all means be like unlikable or very like we should blame him kind of. She helps us to empathize with him, and that is really important in this novel, and I think it makes it an important novel for people that have experiences with some of the themes that this book is talking about as well. Another just amazing part of this book is the writing is so beautiful. It is so poetic. There are so many beautiful metaphors in this book that I just love. I wish I had gone through and highlighted them because they were so beautiful, and I would definitely love to reread this and annotate it because it was just very well done. And there was so much full circle in the book as well that I really love. I also just thought that the story was great. The characters were very compelling and we wanted to follow them through their lives and see what was happening. There were things that were going on in the book that like went either the way you were hoping or ways you weren't hoping, and all of that was done really well. It is definitely a book that surprises you and definitely one that can keep you off guard if you're not expecting some of the things that are happening, but it was so well done. I would definitely recommend this book to anyone who is interested in family dynamics and relationship dynamics and generational kind of experiences. It was just a beautiful read, and I also gave this one a 5-star. Alright, and the last book that I read in March was Cloud Cuckoo Land by Anthony Doerr. This book follows 5 different main characters from 3 different points in time, one from the far past, one from the present, or what was the present when the book was written, and then one from the near future, like 100 years or so away. And it follows the story of these characters who are all connected by a book called Cloud Cuckoo Land, or a play called Cloud Cuckoo Land that has been translated or played a big role in each of the 5 main characters' lives. This book handles how each of those 5 main characters deals with the Cloud Cuckoo Land story and what role it plays in their lives. And it's really a story about the power of words, the power of literature and plays and translation, and also a little bit about the power of like librarians and the role of a library in a person's life. This book was definitely a super fun read. I really loved reading about each of the 3 different settings. We're kind of set in ancient Constantinople area, and then in the present we're in like Idaho, and then in the future we're on like a spaceship. And so getting all 3 of those settings in one book was really exciting because you get a little bit of historical fiction, a little bit of like contemporary or realistic fiction, and then a little bit of sci-fi futuristic fiction. And so that was done really well, and I think that Anthony Doerr did a really good job at showing how each of their stories is connected in some way, even though they are separated by so much time. I also loved his treatment of each of the characters. They are flawed characters. They are characters that are facing hardship. They are characters that have not had the easiest time in life necessarily, but Anthony Doerr handles them so delicately and treats them in such a humane way, and that was really beautiful as well. Just to see characters that are not necessarily the people you would pick to read a book about. Like one of the characters that we're reading about, he is dealing with a lot and ends up becoming aggressive and committing a crime that is pretty atrocious, but we get to see so much of his story. And I think that that is why books can be super powerful, because we're kind of getting a behind the scenes of like what it might be like for someone that does something that we think is unthinkable, that for them might make sense, or even if it doesn't make sense, like is justified because of how their world has been shaped and what has happened to them in their life and that kind of thing. So I really love that part of the book. I also felt like this book just offered a lot of wisdom about life and our place in the world and what matters to us and what's important and how we can overcome challenges, and all of that was very interesting to read about as well and very moving. Overall, I think this book is just a book that speaks to the importance of reading and libraries and story and how words can bind people across generations together. I think it's a cry for preserving the written language and preserving story itself, and I found that to be very moving as well. So when I first went to rate this book, I gave it a 4-star because I was like, man, I really didn't like how disjointed all of the stories were, but on further reflection, I'm thinking of actually moving that up to a 5, because I feel like even though the stories are disjointed across time and at some point it can feel like, how are these even connected? At the very end, there are some connections that are made, but also I think that the book kind of transcends that in a way by saying that the importance of story is not that all of us are connected and that we all meet up at a certain point, but the story itself that travels through time is kind of what binds us all together. And I think that is more of the point that the book was trying to make than kind of connecting all of them in like a weird way at the end. So I think I would bump this up to a 5-star. I found the writing to be very beautiful and authentic, and the stories to be very beautiful of each of the main characters, and it just gives you a lot of sympathy for people and for the things people have been through, and also a lot of hope for the power of the written word and what it can do. So yeah, that was Cloud Cuckoo Land by Anthony Doerr. So those are the 13 books that I have read from January to March. If you have read any of these books before and you have thoughts on them, I would love to hear them in the comments down below. I would also love to hear about any books that you have read this winter or read recently, what your thoughts are, any recommendations that you have. I would be happy to hear. I thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed it and maybe found some new book recommendations of your own, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!